Hello, welcome to this tutorial on web scraping part 2. In the previous tutorial, we looked at the difference between the internet and the World Wide Web. We also talked briefly about how to use Python to access the web as well as process content on the web. We mostly looked at parsing HTML content. In this session, while we will talk about slightly more advanced features in Beautiful Soup, I would encourage that I would encourage you to go back and review what we covered in part 1. For example, we used the request package, right, to be able to open a web resource. Then we used Beautiful Soup, right, that we downloaded from Python to basically convert the HTML file into a different representation. And we'll talk more about this representation in a few minutes. Basically, we did that by typing out a few lines of code here, request get, and then an R object, right? And from there, we used r.text to get a string representation of that HTML code. For example, if I run this code, and I remember since the r.text output is a string, I don't want to see the entire output. I'm just going to get the first 100 characters or so. So this is what I see. By using this simple lines of code, we end up getting the HTML content from the web resource. And note that so far we haven't started using Beautiful Soup. Okay, once we extract the HTML code, then we would take this C, right, and then we would put this into Beautiful Soup to convert it into a different object. This is what we did in the last class. So before we talk about the more advanced features, again, we're not going to talk about all the advanced features, obviously slightly more advanced features than what we did in the last class. Let's take a quick look at how this HTML content, right, might be represented internally. So it's always useful to visualize. If you look at the HTML content, it's useful to visualize the fact that HTML is typically represented like a tree-like structure. For example, here's a header tag. HTML typically consists of head, right, and then it also has body tags. Again, if you do not recall HTML, go back and take a look at the structure of the HTML page. Here, for example, here's my page, right, that we worked with on the last class. Very simple HTML page. If you look at the source, the HTML source, you do see that HTML tag opens, close HTML tag. Then there are two major parts: head, close head tag. The second part is body, close body tag. And within head, you have a bunch of tags. Within body, you have other bunch of tags, right? So even if you don't know the exact meaning of these individual tags, it's nice to know the structure of how this HTML tags are organized. And this is what we call as DOM structure. And it's a tree-like structure. Like, for example, under the body, you might have a bunch of tags. And within the tags, you may have other tags. And this is always what you're going to see out there when you're looking at HTML code. And here I have a sample HTML code, and you see how it is represented as a tree-like structure. Okay, so now when we are looking at Beautiful Soup, what we typically do is we need to understand that Beautiful Soup typically represents these tags in that tree-like structure. So if you have this knowledge, then it's probably easier for us to write code in Beautiful Soup to be able to get the content we want from the HTML code. Okay, so to move forward, let's look at the documentation that's already available. It's actually well written, easy to understand documentation. And here's another new code. If you actually wanted to see this web page, obviously I could copy, paste, and put it in a different tag, or I could also use this package called web browser, import web browser dot the function. I'm accessing the method open_new, type in the URL, in quotes, run the code, shift enter, and you should see the Beautiful Soup documentation. Okay, I'm just going to close the extraneous tabs here. So let's when you get the moment, obviously, try to take a more detailed look at the content here. I'm going to try to use the examples they use here so that it's easier for you to follow along my tutorial as well as the examples they use in this documentation. So what they do here is, instead of going outside and grabbing an HTML page, they already provide us with a sample HTML code, right? Assume that we've already grabbed something that's out there using request or URL lib. We have some HTML code. This is the example HTML code that I'm going to be using. So if you come back to this, the Jupyter Notebook, this is what you see. So I have the code that I copied from the documentation, okay? And please note that this entire HTML code is enclosed in 3 triple quotes. This is another way of representing string. We use 3 triple quotes just so that we can write this out in multiple lines, okay? In the past, we looked at using single quote, double quote for string objects. Here's another way of representing string objects. Use 3 triple quotes, open 3 triple quotes, close 3 triple quotes to represent string in multiple lines, okay? So now what we see here, right? I'm assigning this to this variable called HTML doc. It's quite similar to, if I go back up here, quite similar to the C here. C equal to our text, and if you remember, we got some output, right? That's an HTML code. And then we took this and then we put this inside Beautiful Soup. So that's what we are going to do now. So let me go back down here. So we have HTML code. Let's assume we grabbed it from somewhere. We assigned it to a variable called HTML_doc. Now, let us do the typical thing we did in the last class. From BS4, import Beautiful Soup. And now I'm assigning that HTML_doc variable, right, to this Beautiful Soup object, to this Beautiful Soup method. And I'm using this parser called HTML parser. The last class I mentioned that we could use multiple types of parser. And if you paid attention, we used 2 types, LXML or HTML parser. It does not matter for our purposes. It does not matter which parser we use, but you should specify one of the 2. Okay. And there are other parsers available. If you're interested, you can always do a Google search to look at the pros and cons of each. Okay. So now this is what we did in the last class. Let's see whether we are able to successfully get the HTML code and represent this as a soup object. Okay, I could actually print this directly. Let me show you print, right? I could do this. So let me try to do this. I'm going to comment this out and run this. So you do get something. You do get the exact same code. So we know that we've successfully moved this as a soup object. Let's check the object type. I'm going to say, what's the type of this? And we can see obviously that this is a Beautiful Soup object. Okay, and I want to show you an alternate way of printing. Instead of just saying print soup, I can also say print soup dot prettify, then open parenthesis, close parenthesis. While using Beautiful Soup, if I use this, it actually lets me see a nicer view of the HTML code. So let me try to print this. It's printing, I think. Oh, it's commented out, so I need to take out the comment. And let me run this code again. So now you see that it's a slightly better representation of the previous flat code that's here. So you can actually see more clearly some of the indentations. HTML, close HTML. You see head, close head, body, close body, then slightly indented other tags. I mean, not perfect, but it's a slightly better representation of the HTML tag. Again, useful to know. Okay, so let's assume that now we have this code, we have this imported into, we moved into Beautiful Soup as a Beautiful Soup object. What can we do with this? Okay, again, remember that it's represented as a tree-like structure. HTML head, body, right? Then within these head, there are other tags, right? So with this knowledge, let's come back down here, okay? And if you examine this code, let's say that we have HTML up here, up top. We have head. So let's say that I just wanted to print, okay? There's something called this title. So if you notice, HTML, and then you have head, and then you have title, okay? So what I do here is I have soup.html.head.title. Okay, this is what I mean by the tree-like structure. Okay, soup is the beautiful soup object. I call on HTML, and then one step below that is head, one step below that is title. Let's see what happens. Let me run this code, and you see that it retrieved the title part of the tag. Okay, and other interesting possibilities here are what happens, for example, let me comment this out. If I just say soup.html, right? Think about this. Beautiful soup object .html. What do you think should print? Let's run this and see. It prints the whole code that's under HTML. Soup is object, and I'm asking for everything that's under HTML. So let me comment this out. Now let's see, pause this if you want. Think about what might happen if I run this. soup.html.head. If we go back up here, soup is the object, HTML head, right? And head finishes here. What do you think should print? Okay, so let's see. I ran this, so it's going to print everything that's enclosed within the head tag. Okay, so there are multiple ways of accessing something. So I wanted to show that by running this code. What do you think might happen if I run this? soup.title. Okay, the interesting thing here is that if I run this, it also gives me access to the title. If I go back up here, HTML head title, it gives me access to the title tag. Okay, so that's what this does. So I could have accessed the title by either typing in soup.html.head.title or simply soup.title. But you got to be careful here if you're going to use this last representation, because oftentimes it's going to give you the first tag that it finds under title. Okay, so you may miss other things. So we're going to see some other examples using anchor tags, but just remember that there are multiple ways of getting the title tag. But if you're going to be using it directly, calling the title directly from the soup object, you want to be a little bit more careful, because it's going to grab the first thing it finds, and then it's going to return that to you. It'll ignore some of the other ones. And depending on what you're expecting, sometimes it's what you want, sometimes it may not be what you want. So you want to be careful. It's always better to go the longer route if you have a choice. Okay. All right. So with that done, think about what we just did here, trying to access the content. Now, I wonder if you could try for me, to write a code to access an anchor tag. So you do see here in the code here somewhere, you see an anchor tag. That's this, right? And then you have the link. And if you do not recall this, we did this in the last part of the video, the part 1, how to extract anchor tags. Can we now try to get these anchor tags? How would you write the code? So if you can take a moment, think about it, the code look like. So let's see if this works. soup.a. So I did get something, soup.a. So let's look at the code. The link that it's pointing to here is LC. So it quite literally grabbed the first A tag it found in the code, right? HTML went all the way down, looked at the first tag, that's printing the first tag. If this is what you wanted, that's great. If not, then you may have to think about other ways of accessing this. Okay, and if I go down here, I can also do this a different way. How would I access this in the roundabout way? HTML dot what should be between HTML and A. So I mentioned here, HTML code, head is one part, body is the next part. So perhaps body. So what you might want is HTML dot body dot A might give me the same result, right? What happens if I type in body.p.a? So you do not get anything, because suddenly you do not see a result here. What you should have seen, simply because you went too far. You went HTML, you went to body, you went to P, and it's looking for a tag under the P, close P paragraph tag, right? There is no a tag here, so you do not get a result. So you want to be careful how you access. So you've got to be able to type this in correct. So the right way of typing this would be .a. Okay, and then again you can do this well, right? A again is under, if you remember, A is under another P, but it did not give you a result before because it's looking under the first P. Okay. Okay, so you want to be careful about how you access the anchor tag. So one way of doing this is soup.html.body.a. Other ways of doing it, soup.a. Okay. Okay. So now, if you think about it, what do we do if we wanted all of the a tags in the HTML code? And this is what we did as a simple example of grabbing tags. If you remember, we used this command. Now that we have the soup object, we can actually use a method called find all, find underscore all, and get me the a tag. Okay, open code, close code, put the tag inside the code, right? And let me try to run this, and bingo. Now I have all of these 3 anchor tags in there. And again, if you remember, go back and review the content from before. You can actually use another method called get to get just the link. So again, you may want to go back to the other video to review how we did that. But this is really what we did. How do we grab a tag? All the tags in a code, we use this very, very useful find all method, okay, under the soup object. So very useful to know. And of course, this will not only work for a tag, it will work for any tag. What happens if I do P? Just going to grab all of the P tags. Okay, so it's a very useful method to know when you're trying to do a project, if you decide to do the project on HTML parsing. Okay, and finally, I want to clarify one other thing. Sometimes you might find me using this command, find, no space there, capital A, L. Then I might say find a tag, obviously within quotes. So this is okay, but it's an older syntax. So if possible, avoid doing that. Instead, move to this syntax, which is the recommended Python syntax, find underscore small a ll. Okay, so soup.findAll. So it's a very useful command to have. Finally, another thing that I want to talk to you about before we finish the required part of Beautiful Soup is that sometimes you may want to get just the textual content. You don't care for the tags. All you want is the text that's within the HTML file. So there is a method for that called get underscore text, open parenthesis, close parenthesis. Let me try to run this, and here you have just the textual content that's in the file. And you might also notice that when you run this in real world, of course, you're going to see these \n signifying a new line character. So you are unfortunately going to see this. So it's up to you to try to figure out, do you want this in the code or not? But this is a very useful get underscore text. It's a very useful way of getting just the textual content. I can actually even do more things to it. For example, what happens if I type in soup.html, right? Title.getText. Try running this. It's going to get the textual content within the title tag. Okay, so again, a nice, interesting way of getting just the textual content. So with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the required things you need to know for Beautiful Soup. So you're responsible for all this portion until this point. And what I'm going to do in this video is basically try to give you a more optional, additional things that might be useful if you decide to do a project in HTML parsing. I'm going to talk about a little bit more about find all attributes, find all syntax for the find all command, and talk about some of these things. And I'll talk a little bit more about other objects that are available under Beautiful Soup. Okay, another 15-20 minutes, but you don't need to know this for the exam. And if you're not going to do the HTML parsing, you can safely skip the second part. So I'm going to stop the video here. The next part of the video will basically be covering the optional portion in the part 2 of Web Scraping Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so I'll see you soon. Thanks.